The last 12 months have been a wild ride for me personally in blockchain. I launched my first large-scale NFT sale and have seen the emergence of a new and dynamic class of creative entrepreneurship. NFTs are proving irresistible to establish talent from outside of blockchain. Eminem is doing an NFT. And one of the great privileges of making films for the Defiant has been the opportunity to connect with huge talents that I would never have been able to previously. Now we're trying to figure out the rules of this space pretty much in real time. And people just want to chat, no BS, they just want to share information and help others along the way. And that is awesome. Now over the coming months, I will be sharing more and more of these conversations because there are fascinating insights into how non-crypto natives, particularly highly creative ones, are viewing this space and looking to build a home here. And we start with filmmaker, entrepreneur, and motivational speaker Tom Bilyeu of Impact Theory, alongside the exceptionally talented Maciej Kuciara, whose work you will undoubtedly recognize from films like Ghost in the Shell and Avengers Endgame, Blade Runner. And that really is such a very reductive way of looking at his body of work. But if you're interested in learning more, I'll leave links in the description below. Personally, big fan. Now, this pair have teamed up with the legendary DJ and producer Steve Aoki to bring the world of their sci-fi comic book series Neon Future to life in NFT form. So imagine Maciej's art, Steve's music in an NFT. Now there will be 5 original minted pieces available in full color, as well as an old school high contrast black and white kind of manga version. And the collection is coming to Nifty Gateway on the 27th, which as I record this is tomorrow. Now this is the collision of 3 stellar creative minds, but when they approached me to have a chat, I was instinctively skeptical. Because you see, we've seen a stack of money grabs over the last 12 months with artists just kind of cashing in because they'd seen the giant paydays of the likes of Beeple. But after our conversation though, it's clear that's not how they view this. They're in it for the long run. Tom's commitment to the NFT space is actually pretty significant, but you can tell there is still so much more of this onion of ours for them to discover. And hopefully our chat was enough to persuade them to keep digging and keep learning, to push this form on and genuinely innovate, because that's what we need right now. We need people to be experimenting and trying new things. It was an inspiring chat, and there's no doubt these are people with a huge amount to bring to the space. I was inspired by them, I hope they were inspired by me, and I hope you're inspired by the conversation that we had, and I wish them all the best. I guess my first question is, how have you found your way into NFTs, and what's appealing to you about NFTs as a platform for expression?
Well, I'll speak from my side, and then we'll let the artist take it away, who I'm sure he has a lot to say about it. From my perspective, it's really looking at it as a technology, and as somebody who is obsessed with collecting, and somebody who really, when we made the switch as a content creator, when we made the switch to being entirely digital, I was like, wow, when you look at the top 25 highest grossing media properties of all time, literally all of them except one make 85% of their revenue from merchandise. And as much of a cliche as that has become, it was like, man, in the digital world, like you get huge advantages, but you actually have less ways for your fan base to love and like connect with the project. And so about 6 years ago, somebody showed me, they didn't call it NFTs back then, of course, but they showed me rare digital goods. And I was like, oh my God, that's going to change my business when it actually happens. But it was early. And so I just sort of forgot about it, to be honest, and just focus on creating content. And then when NFTs started popping off and it made it back on my radar, I was like, all right, we're going all in on this, because it was obvious 6 years ago that the technology would change consumer behavior, especially when you think about people grow up now as digital natives. And so it just seemed pretty self-evident. So once the technology reached a point where it was viable, then we just went all in.
Well, I can see behind you, you have collectibles, you're displaying them proudly. And there's always a display mechanism to what we collect that, you know, it shows off our identity. And there is something gloriously display-oriented about comic books. They are a means of displaying story in the most kind of bite-sized and concise way. Maciej, what have you found exciting about this new platform? Because in many ways, I think we've gotten accustomed to JPEGs and music and things being stuff we just consume for free, but suddenly there's this new value proposition attached to it. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Right. And I actually do look past that value, like past what's going to happen in a year from now or 2 years from now, where we are more in how this technology can be used past what is used for right now, which is basically tokenizing art. I think it's like almost like it sounds like a digital renaissance for artists, because as you said, like before you could collect things that were scarce and made non-digital. So by virtue of that, they were scarce. With digital, like as you said, you have JPEGs, and well, what stops you from copying a JPEG from the website? And well, you have it then, right? Like what's the reasoning for someone to invest into a JPEG? Like that's the question I think people was asked like many times. Like, why would you buy a $69 million JPEG? And the best analogy I've heard for that was, there's an Eiffel Tower, and there are copies of Eiffel Tower. There only one matters. Like nobody cares about the copies of it. Like someone built in Vegas or in China, like nobody cares about them because those are copies. Like clearly everyone understands that. And I think what's the most exciting about NFTs specifically for artists like myself is that now all the work we're putting in, that just by the virtue of how it's created is copyable. Like anything that is digital can be replicated. But you can set it so that it's unique. It has its own token. It has its own value, and it creates the narrative that was non-existent before. And I find that aspect of NFTs the most interesting, and the sort of like revolutionizing for artists like myself. The second thing I think that's the most encouraging that I saw in the space, and this is what the drop itself that we're doing here with Steve and with Tom, is that it's literally the first time in history, with minor exceptions, obviously, that digital artists are in the forefront of this all. They're not just hired for work that they just do, and then nobody cares who did what. Like when you watch the music videos, with exception to credits, like you don't really know who did that. Versus this is almost becoming like a mini production that is more of a collaboration than work for hire. And I find that to be big, specifically that, because it creates a different space for artists, which didn't exist before, or was much, much less accessible. Let's put it this way.
Well, that's an interesting point. I do remember back in the early 2000s when I was directing music videos, you'd pitch on an idea and you never get paid for that idea. You get paid you get underpaid, let's say, to work really hard, and then a record label will make a ton of money off, the physical expression of an artist. But there is a kind of counter narrative to this, which is it's just a kind of gold rush. People are leaping in willy-nilly and selling any old garbage that they had just because they can, and it's actually forcing a lot of people to think about what they consider a high quality item, and I think most people don't really have a very good answer to that. From your point of view, do you think there's an educational imperative here that we need to tell people how to understand what they're buying better?
I'll say this is probably the best thing I can say, because I'm not good with words. Like the only thing I'm really good at is art. Like that's my alma mater. That's where I feel the most comfortable. And so when it comes to a subject of what is meaningful for others, I generally don't think about that. I don't think like whether there needs to be a correction or not. I approach the space from a perspective that I want to make something awesome, and I want my art to speak for itself. And that's the only thing that matters. I'm not focusing on other people, what they are doing in the space, what are other artists creating. Like I know a lot of friends that are in the space, and I spoke with people many times. I spoke with other artists that are in the space many times, and I'm super happy for them because I know who they are. But I don't focus like, oh, you made this much money or that. Like that doesn't matter to me personally, because the only thing that I have in control is the way I work and the way I produce work and what kind of impact that work has. That's the only tangible that I can control and have absolute power over, right? So I look at it from perspective of like with any markets that are emerging, there's always a hype, there's always a correction, there's always like a second wave of hype and then the second wave correction. And then usually you start to see like actual real world use cases. I believe NFTs are that for collectors, for people that love digital art, and now they have a reason to own it. I'm just going to have a JPEG paper or something like that's just like doesn't matter to me. But if I have a token that says, I'm one of the owners of that artwork, stay in that art, then that's fantastic. And the way the one of the reasons why I didn't jump in like right away into the space is that I wanted to do it with the right people, with the right partners, and also with the intent that I just need time to make something good, really, really good that I would put out there and be proud of. And I think, I hope the work's going to speak for itself here. So,
well, I think in your case, there's no doubt that you are an artist of extreme talent, and you have a point of view and you have a way of seeing the world. And I think we can understand what that is from your body of work. And if anyone who hasn't seen it, well, go watch. As someone that makes things, I respect it immensely, and I could talk to you for hours about your particular take on manga, on anime, particularly women's faces. I think it's fascinating because it's not quite what we're accustomed to. I love it, but I want to jump back to Sterling now, because you said something earlier. You said we're going all in on NFTs, and I really want to dig into what you mean by that. By going all in, what that actually looks like for you.
Yeah, for sure. So first, I should clarify, Sterling is my assistant. My name is Tom.
I know. It says on the screen.
Yeah, sorry. That's totally going to throw everybody off. So what going all in for us means is literally like we're hiring a president of, and I'm not even sure what to call it, Web3, the metaverse, NFTs. It's like there isn't a great sort of umbrella name for this yet, but we're allocating millions of dollars to developing things, whether it's gameplay in, Sandbox or Decentralized, or, ultimately could we dabble in creating our own metaverse? Who knows? We'll see where that goes. But with NFTs, so the primary driver of our business is storytelling. So we write stories, and those stories start out as webtoon. So if you're familiar with manga, it's probably closest to that. Technically, it's manhwa, but manga will get you in the right sort of realm. And so storytelling is our obsession, and you want to create a way to have deeper experience with that. And where the digital revolution is going was pretty clear that it was leading us into video games, pretty clear it was leading towards VR and the metaverse. But it wasn't clear until recently that there was a way to have ownership of something that was digital. And so we're building out a marketplace focused on this kind of content. So anime, manga, video games, we're niching out on that. So the drop that we're doing now is going to be on Nifty. But ultimately we're, in development right now. We're probably about 6 weeks from beta launch, 12 weeks from really going live with our own marketplace, but focus primarily on that niche. Like I said, we're, spending millions of dollars in development, bringing on a president of that side, and building out a suite of offerings that all echo from those stories. So we write the story, and then we create. Our plan right now is in Decentralized. You would go there to learn about it. So think about walking into a museum that's telling you about the different characters. And if you're a reader, you'll go deeper into the world, learn more about the lore. On Sandbox, where we're investing in land, you go and actually play games based on the stories that we're telling. And that's like the beginnings of this. It'll be so interesting to play this back in 10 years and to see like how much bigger it gets than that, but we've got the capital to back it up and to really see this stuff through. So yeah, it'll be, when I say all in, I really mean all in.
So about 15 years ago, there was this hot topic. I think Lance Weiler was the guy, transmedia storytelling. So it was storytelling that could pop off into different platforms and be carried everywhere with you. And it seems so far ahead of its time. There is a degree to which that time has now come. And it's not that storytelling is verbal or oral or musical, it's everything. And it's this full digital kind of compartment of everything that we believe that represents culture to us. I don't want to put words into your mouth, but when I get excited about it, it's this encapsulation of things that is portable, that we can carry with us. And I wonder if you see that kind of potential in what you're building, and maybe that's why you get so excited about it.
The ability to be immersed. And I think we're at the beginning. I think that we're still a long way away from Ready Player One, which is certainly where I want to be. I won't speak for anybody else, but that vision of the future is one I find extraordinarily compelling. But we finally have an on-ramp. Like we can finally see where this is going, where people are saying, okay, look, the 3D, the VR, that's maybe a little bit away still, but we can do these browser-based games or even, have an app that you put on either your phone or your computer. And it's pretty extraordinary. And putting the power in the hands of the community, that was the big breakthrough. I mean, that, like when I think about what Web3 is, the ability to control your money, the ability to build your own game, the ability to create items and sell them, the ability to buy an NFT that has utility. I mean, the things that we have coming for NFTs, I don't think, that's why I said my answer is what makes NFTs exciting. It is a technology. And once you understand the technology, once you understand that Maciej could create something and he makes let's say he's got this show called Showtime, which I am so obsessed with. And if he would let me partner with him, I would do it in a second. It's absolutely amazing. But now imagine he creates one of these incredible pieces and he has it such that it's picking up on the RFID of your phone and the woman will watch you as you walk by. That stuff is becoming possible. And so now you've got a piece of art that when it rains in your world, it's raining in the piece of art. Right? If you've got a character, let's say you have games or sports is a great example. You have a mural of an athlete, and when they score in real life, fireworks explode in the NFT that you now have mounted in a special screen on your wall. I mean, that's where this stuff is going, or just on your phone, right? Because we're all going to run out of wall space. So I am so bullish on the fact that when you understand the technology, you get that it's a one-way street. We may have the ups and downs that Maciej is talking about. I think that's absolutely true. Once you understand the use case of the technology, there's no going back.
So I have a different theory on this, because I agree with you that NFTs are a technology, but I actually think they're more like an app, they're more like a platform. And to render them simply as collectibles and these kind of things is so reductive. I come from the creative world, but I've also spent a lot of time confronting this idea that money is a set of handcuffs that binds us to things that we don't like, particularly creatively. But there is a financial reality to being a creative human being. And I think where people get stuck is I make something, I sell it. But do you see other opportunities from this technological perspective to imbue digital items not only with cultural value, but with financial value that we can reimagine every bit as much as we do the creative part?
I think that it's new enough that I will just point to the things that are already being done that show it's going to happen. But I would be a fool to think that I'll predict what will be the big revolution here. But the fact that you have families now in the Philippines that make a second income off of Axie Infinity is bananas. I mean, you're playing a video game and you're able to actually make money. And I think that, again, going back to this idea of some things are just a one-way street. Once you give the power to somebody to create something, use it in a game, make money off of it, either stake it or sell it, rent it out. Like imagine you can build a sword up in a video game that you rent to somebody else who just wants to play the game. I mean, that is breathtaking. Now imagine raising a generation that take that for granted. That's just how video games work to them. So I promise that that's only the beginning, and that people will just come up with more and more clever ways. Like, I never would have guessed DeFi, and yet here it is already changing the world. So what's going to be the next thing? I don't know. I just know it's going to be a thing.
Well, I think what's fascinating about it is that we want to put things into silos, but they're not. You know, I was talking to a digital fashion designer yesterday. They're building an interoperable 3D file format that can travel between games. But it could easily pass into your Instagram account, so you can use an AR thing and it would dress you. And she was talking about having textures and individual fabric components that can be NFTs in their own right, and you could just design those and sell those as components that then a digital designer can put together. And Maciej, for you, I think what we're looking at so far is a sort of translation of what you do anyway into an NFT format. But are you feeling inspired at all to try new things or try new ways of putting your art out there, inspired by NFTs, or is it still kind of very much, I know what I do and I can do it in an NFT way, but it's not changing the way I create at all?
Pretty much a history of my art life, like always trying new things and you know, seeing where those things can take me. I want to kind of piggyback on what Tom was saying, and you kind of mentioned in the passing, is that, you know, the idea of like limiting it to only collectible, but also looking at it from perspective of, like, imagine you're playing your favorite game that you're so time invested into, and you collect items that are rare and scarce that only like certain amount of people can collect because of the way the game is designed. If that game disappears, you lose all your time and effort. But if your items that you have earned in that game become tokenized, then they stay with you forever, no matter if the game is there or not. So like seeing a way of how this could translate. Okay, if there's a way to translate, and there certainly is, just a matter of like who makes what kind of deal with whom, to another game where it's like, look, like this 20-year-old game that doesn't exist anymore, I got this super rare item and I can use it now, and I become someone special that brings that legacy from the past into the future. That's just like, wow, that's just so cool. Because we like to have, like, when we invest our time into something, we like to be rewarded for it. And I think NFT by itself, just by the design, brings the possibility to be rewarded for that. I think that the big part for designers and artists in that space is that now you can, like, it's very similar to what social media did for artists and YouTube did for artists and Instagram and Twitter. Before any of that, the most logical path would be you would become an artist working for film or video game industry or a fine artist. And that's pretty much about it. Like, you could also do book covers and magazine covers. There's obviously niches, but you would basically be a gun for hire and work. Then social media comes in and YouTube comes in. In the early stages, it was just all over the place. Like, YouTube, when it was created, is like, what the hell's going on? Like, it was just so wild. But now you have people who are literally superstars because of YouTube, and artists who only live off from creating content for YouTube. They don't have to work for Sony, for Disney, for Marvel. They don't have to deal with any of that. They can fully express themselves on those platforms. And NFT is almost like another stepping stone that gives artists the freedom to basically do what they do best. Because like I would argue that vast majority of artists, there are obviously artists that love working with clients, and that's the only thing they want to do because they just love to be attached to existing properties. They're big fans and whatnot. But at least from my perspective, from the friends I talk with, like, we all love to create on the side. Like, we do work because we have to pay bills, but we also love to create art just for sake of making it. It's just in our blood. And now it just allows, you know, artists like myself and others to, okay, there's other avenues for me to look into. There's maybe a possibility where whatever I create almost becomes like a crowdfunding for whatever else I want to create. And the fan base then starts to matter. And it's just this technology that kind of interconnects everything. It's as you said, it's like putting everything into silos is kind of silly. because it's all interconnected and it's all sort of in working together. And predicting also like makes no sense, because especially with NFT space, like it seems like every day is like a month. It's just everything's just moving so fast. So yeah, like when someone asks a question, is it this or is it that? What is it going to be? It's like, well, I can only say what I think, but like the likelihood of that, you know, me predicting a future is very low. Because what, like a year from now, 99.9%, like a year, like in 2020, 99.99% of people didn't know what NFTs are at all. Most of the artists I talked with, and I would ask, like, do you know about NFTs? Like, I wouldn't ask because I didn't know. So,
well, no, that's the funny thing, because I made a film at sort of back end of last year talking about specifically Trevor Jones and a guy called Robert Alice who did an NFT. It was an NFT bolted onto a very imposing piece of physical art that sold at Christie's, and it was a big deal. Nobody talked about it. Nobody cared. I made this film about this, what I thought was going to be a big deal. Nobody cared. 4 months later, everybody cared. And you suddenly realize that this thing that you just done and it was gone was like, oh shit, people really like that. Then I started making a new film, which I wanted to sort of capture all the different things that I was seeing in the NFT space. It ended up being 90 minutes long for a YouTube video, because there was literally so much to talk about. But also I realized that if I left it any later and I picked up these things individually, the story will be gone. So I had to capture this moment in time. But I think, as you rightly say, that what we think of as NFTs is a bit of a misleading thing, because I think that the temptation is to call them or think of them as MP3s. And MP3s are a compression mechanism, and that's it. But NFTs are an expression mechanism, and they're fundamentally fascinating for one reason, and this is my personal thing. They allow you to interact with financial protocols in a way that artists have never been privileged to do before. So when you were talking about YouTube and the ability of artists to become entrepreneurs, but I'm curious if you see this being a bolt-on to the social activities that people have been using, or whether you want to see people embrace more decentralized kind of ways of thinking that take them outside of YouTube and of these sort of comfortable but very centralized services that we've been using. Because it feels like that should be the next logical frontier for all of this.
Right. I mean, obviously right now we do have scarcity in platforms. Like that's just because it's just so fresh and new. But I think Shopify just recently started embracing DeFi, and I think I think there are other commerce places that are doing the same. I know there are several platforms that are basically almost plugin like for artists to just basically, oh, here's a plugin for my website. Now I can mint NFTs. That's coming for sure. And that's great because basically what it allows you to do is become your own business. You become a businessman, and you create your own ideas what the NFT can do for you specifically, instead of relying on what platforms can do for you, which is great. That we need that. But I think that's the next sort of like a logical step, that it will allow you to basically leverage your ideas more and create something that is very unique within your own ecosystem, and let it play out and see if it's successful. And we'll definitely see use cases where artists come up with something incredibly innovative and it will just blow up, and they will not need any platform for that. They will just need their own website to do that. I think the second big thing is that a lot of artists that are getting into NFT, they start to understand crypto as well, including myself. It's just like it's almost like a stepping stone to like, oh, okay, like in school nobody told me about finances. Like the more you learn about it, the better. And now it's like you learn about crypto because you have to. Like it's a part of the business, right? And it's very fascinating. It's very eye-opening to what's possible. And then like once you get into crypto, you start to look into DeFi and like what's going on there and the applications and all of those things that are just becoming, wow, there's just, it's almost like its own playground.
Well, this was exactly my point, which is it confronts artists with something that traditionally they're not very comfortable with, which is money. And so Tom, I wanted to rewind to something that you said earlier. You were talking about not quite knowing what was out there, what was coming. And I wonder if you see yourself taking on more of a role of like a pioneer and figuring this stuff out on the fly in the wild, because I am sure you realize this now, there are no rules yet. That, you know, you can go on YouTube and it will be, you can find 1,000 videos that will tell you how to beat the algorithm, but no one has figured out anything yet. So it's all up for grabs. And I'm curious what your take on this is.
Yeah, that's the fun, man. So there's a quote that really bothers me because it is so true. And I think it was Max Planck that said it. And he said, science doesn't advance one insight at a time. It advances one funeral at a time. Because what happens is people get so dogmatic about something, they cannot break out of that. And their entire identity, their reputation, the money that they make, all of it is tied up in whatever legacy system got them there. And so it really, like, they can't encounter a new truth and be excited by it. They encounter a new truth and they're threatened by it. And this is exactly why it's always the youth that disrupts the previous generations. But it doesn't have to be that way. Like, if you can be excited by one idea, and this idea sits at the heart of my soul, skills have utility. If you learn something, it lets you do something. So because I'm obsessed with doing things in my life, when I hear about new stuff, I'm like, oh shit, what's this going to let me do, right? And if I can get better at this thing than anybody else, what thing will I be able to do that other people can't do? So I try to walk into everything I do with that sort of pioneer spirit of like, okay, we've gotten this far, but what's that new thing? How do we push the boundaries? And, you know, taking the sort of cue from Elon Musk of think from first principles. Like, don't get trapped, right? So whenever somebody wins a Nobel Prize, it is almost always from two areas that overlap. You're not going to win it for just chemistry. You're not going to win it for just biology. You're going to win it where those two areas intersect. And that idea has really pushed me. So inadvertently in my life, I've sort of completely reinvented myself every 10 years. And the way that that's played out, so I start in film, right? That's my background, my first passion. Go to film school, come out. Then I get into business in security software of all things, because I realized if you want to control the art, you have to control the resources. And so coming to Hollywood with my hand out, this is all before YouTube. There was like $100,000 was a no budget film. And I just had no idea how to make it. So I get into security software, realize I hate that, even though it's making me money. I go into nutrition thinking this is just something that I can love, because I now realize success isn't guaranteed, but the struggle is. So I better struggle at something that I love. So get into nutrition. Long story, how that made sense in my life, but it made sense. Just trust me. And, you know, that ends up being this just freakish success because I focused not on money, but on new stuff, pushing the boundaries, like extending the envelope. And so we came into what everybody said was a crowded space. It was declining. It's dead. What are you doing? And we realized if you can do it differently, if you can find that new thing, like you can really change the landscape. And so we became our own manufacturers, developed our own equipment. Think about that, like manufacturing really big, really expensive metal contraptions to produce a new kind of food. And it, you know, I mean, it just exploded and had huge reverberations to the industry. So now coming into a media company, looking at what's happening in technology and how much is shaking it up, and just really taking that pioneer spirit and saying, all right, cool. Nobody knows anything. That makes it more fun. And as long as you're not embarrassed by your failures, then there's, you know, huge upside.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that the youth disrupt. I have this strange feeling that crypto is not like that. And it resists if you try and force that on it. Yes, there are Zoomers in here and there's retail investors, but you know, you see Mark Cuban come in and he gets it. I mean, he gets it really, really like well. And you have to kind of respect that. Like this guy with all this experience is coming in here and just, I mean, buying every NFT platform he can get his hands on. There must be something here.
I think that he runs contrary to it though. So he's one of those always looking for what's new, always going to be cutting edge. He'll be 95 and looking for what's cutting edge. But the vast majority of humanity, man, this is going to be damaging. They won't see it coming. They're going to resist it. And I'm surprised if you haven't encountered people that are patently terrified about this. I think the legacy system is going to fight and fight hard. I think they're going to fight dirty and ugly in a lot of different places. It's going to be an upsetting time for a lot of people. Obviously, ultimately, I'm super optimistic about what's on the other side, but I think it's going to be real weird for a minute.
I think it started getting weird some time ago. You know, when we look around, I mean, Maciej, I'd love you to present what you can about the piece, about Neon Future, what it's about, because we've talked about the broader technology, but I'd love to hear the kind of inspiration around this, the story, the art.
Yeah. Wow, there's just so many angles to approach it from. Like, I think it's kind of crazy. It all started when I was born. No, but really, the genesis of what we did here goes years back. Like, this is not something that, oh, let's make a project together and then let's see what happens. It's, me and Tom kind of go a long way. We started working together back in 2017. 2016, I can't even remember. It's been so many years. The time is flying. And what's interesting, we worked together on developing Neon Future for Steve Aoki. Like, we were there, Tom obviously in Impact Theory, creating the sort of the visual development and the comic books, and I was there to help to see that process through and see if any of my expertise could benefit the whole process. And was really involved and engaged. It was a super fun process. We did some really memorable pieces together. And literally when NFT happened, and Tom, that was kind of crazy, because it went from one phone call to we definitely need to do this together again. And it kind of went there. I'll let Tom to speak about that, and we can go back to the sort of the piece itself.
Yeah, so we were developing Neon Future, and I wanted something far more cinematic than what was being done in the space at the time. And I was showing my art team artists I was obsessed with, and I showed them Maciej. And one of the guys was like, "Oh my God, I took a class from him. I actually know who he is." And he was like, "Let me ping him on Twitter or something and see if we could get a call." And so hits him up, and we got on a call, and I was like, "Look, dude, I think your art is some of the most astonishing art I've ever seen in my life, bar none, and would love to meet with you, come out to the house." And so pitched him the project and said, this is ultimately something that we want to take out. You go back to transmedia, we're trying to make this bigger. So we want it to be a comic book, but we also want it to be a TV show. And, even beyond that, obviously now into gaming and all kinds of stuff. So that was how that began. And his eye is so crazy. So he just informed the project visually a lot. And so when we realized that we wanted to get into NFTs, and we thought, okay, the Neon Future is a project that we already have shared history with, let's do that. He, myself, and Steve Aoki have worked together very, very well in the past. Just thought it would be a no-brainer to do something cool. And I don't know how much you want to get into the genesis of the idea of the story itself and all that. We certainly can. But we took characters from Neon Future. So this is actual real characters that exist in a real story, and embedded them in a new context in a new way, and have come up with some extraordinary pieces. And I could say this because Maciej is the one that made them. They are breathtaking. They are so cool. I just cannot wait for people to see, just purely artistically. You don't have to know the story. You're going to be blown away by the art.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've seen a lot of digital art over the last 6 months, and I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I'm come from the world of cinema, and I appreciate artistic talent, and I've seen a lot of garbage. And so, the problem is that it's very easy for people to kind of be seduced by packaging. Like a Medium article looks, no matter who writes it, it looks legit because of the platform. And so there's a lot of, for instance, Houdini simulations. So Houdini 3D, and they look great. But you're seduced by the fact that someone could produce this for very little money. I feel like we as people who report on this need to, act more like critics and add more critical thinking and discussion to things. And do you feel, Tom, that piece is needed in order to to give people a gateway to appreciating something properly for the merits that it has. Whether it's behind the scenes or interviews with you guys, but to really to get how high quality a piece of work is when they see it.
It's interesting. So I think about art maybe a little bit differently. So some of my favorite pieces of art, somebody else is going to think are trash. One of my favorite movies is an obscure movie from the 1980s called UHF. If you've never seen it, check it out. Weird Al Yankovic. I have watched that movie an ungodly number of times. Now, I also love The Godfather. I love Apocalypse Now. I love A Clockwork Orange. So does that mean the UHF isn't art? It made me feel something. You know what I mean? So where I think the world is going to go is bad art will be a bad investment long-term. And I'll define art as it elicits a strong emotional reaction that people want more of. It could disgust, it could terrify, it could make you feel warm, inspired, whatever, but it evokes an emotional response that you want more of. And then the weirder part of this, and this is where we get into human psychology, dude, I have pinned so many pieces of art on Pinterest, thousands of pins, but they never feel like they're mine. Now, if you told me, hey, Tom, that pin that already exists in a bazillion wallets, you could be one of 10 people to quote unquote own it, I would do that. It makes me feel something different. Now, that's a weird part of the human animal that I don't fully understand, but I experience it and I respect it. So where art criticism comes in is there's a subgenre of people that love that. They understand art well enough to exist on that level. It's much like before I went to film school, I couldn't enjoy film criticism. After I went to film school, I was enthralled by it because now I understood cinematography. I understood editing. I understood sound as a design element, right? Once you understand the nuance and you can actually see the subtle differences and you know the language, then it's fun. But I think criticism is going to exist for like the people that really get it. Like Maciej understands art. He understands line weight. He understands how you use shading and all that stuff. It's crazy when you hear artists talk about it. But like for your average person, it's just an emotional response. So now, to me, the education piece that I hope you and all of the incredible people that are bringing NFTs to the forefront will embark upon is getting people to stop thinking of it just as an investment and to get them to see that there is a world of nuance and beauty and artistry. That will be cool because then more people will feel more when they see the art, and then hopefully they'll collect based on feeling.
Right. It cannot be bad investment if you love what you bought. Yeah,
I think there's.
You can mention. Yep, go ahead.
No. I mean, Tom touched on something that hits really home because I did my own NFT sale at the end of last year, and I deliberately embedded it as an experience that would force you to feel something. And I can send you a link to what it was, but we did 12 NFTs and they were identical apart from one which had a Bitcoin embedded in it. And you could open up the NFT and look and see if the Bitcoin was inside. But the moment you did, it would be signaled to the rest of the world that you had looked. And if you were unsuccessful, then obviously the value of that one NFT drops. And so you have this, so it was called the rug pull. So I embedded game theory into it, but it was this idea that at any moment someone could look inside and suddenly your NFT is worth a lot less. So the idea was to encourage people to work together because the collection as a whole was worth more than simply opening it up and retrieving the Bitcoin. But it was also to try and encapsulate this tension between crypto as the investment side and art as the art side. And the idea was that as the Bitcoin market went up, the pressure on the owners not to look would increase, and you would get this horrible, uncomfortable feeling. So it makes you feel something, and that the idea was to really wrap up the crypto experience that at any moment it could just evaporate into an art. What happened was it got hacked. So someone gamed it and withdrew the Bitcoin. So in essence, what we did is we gave people exactly the experience that we told them we were going to get, which was they got rug pulled. But just not the way we expected. It was crazy.
Brilliant. And in a single story, you just jumped to the top of my interesting people list. This is why I love art and why I find it so intriguing. So I recently heard this description of how areas get gentrified, which I thought was breathtaking. You guys are both going to get it immediately. This is actually real. This is what happens. So you start with an area that's totally run down. Artists can't make much money before NFTs anyway. And so they move to the areas that aren't very nice. But because they're artists, they see potential in the area that other people don't see. So they start to make it cool. As they start to make it cool, then people with money want to live there because it's cool. And now as those people come in, because they were attracted by the artist, the rent starts to go up. You gentrify the area. Now the artists have to move to somewhere else. And they then go somewhere else. They make that cool. And they just keep doing it. And the way that they, like, ecosystems always find a balance, right? So it's like they move from one area and then to the other, and then it just like goes back and forth and it moves all around the city. But the way that artists play the role of transformer is so cool. And the fact that DeFi didn't pop off the way the NFTs did, right? NFTs just speak to more people, right? More people are intrigued by art than are intrigued by finance. Now, I won't argue which one is more important. I'm just saying that more people react to art fast. And so I think artists are showing their ability to transform something once again, but now in the digital space. And where that will go, I never would have predicted that somebody would embed a Bitcoin in a piece of art. And it ended up being the social experiment you wanted it to be no matter what. That's what is so intriguing about that.
Yeah, it was a very strange genesis of the project, because we did some games on the run up to the sale where I challenged people to confront their own greed mechanics. And one of the things I did was I exposed a real wallet that I had, and I exposed the private keys, and people just went in and took the coins. I didn't tell them that was what was going on, but they figured out a puzzle, and then they went in and took all my tokens. And then I bet myself that over the next 3 days, over a weekend, I could compel them through storytelling and suggestion to give all the tokens back. And I 99% succeeded. So that told me that human beings fundamentally, A, are actually good, and B, if the story world you create is compelling enough, the rules, as long as you've bedded them in correctly, will always direct towards a good outcome. And that was a fundamentally amazing experience for me, because I had no idea who these people were, but under the right conditions, they acted correctly. And that was, there were no financial incentives for them to do so, but they did anyway. So it was pretty cool. And I actually think, when you're talking about artists moving to an area and gentrifying it, I believe, because of what's happened with COVID and everything else, that there is a degree to which people no longer feel like they need to be in a city, but they can be anywhere they want, and that the metaverse is going to be this new frontier. And that's why, you talked about decentralized. My metaverse of choice is Somnium. It's VR. It's built on Unity. It's gorgeous when you go in there. And it has these mechanics where you can put a 360 piece of art in there and you can walk into it. You can build separate worlds. It's cool as fuck. I love it. But it's artists who are building that world out because they have the vision to see, you know what? It's empty and there's no one here yet, but I'm just going to build something weird because I can. And maybe if we hack it, we can go underground. Oh yeah, look, we put a chair there. And if you sit on the chair, it drops you, whoa, there's an, okay, cool. And now we put a lift here and we can go underwater. And it's just like, that's what artists bring. And it's just awesome. And that's why I love this space so much. Maciej, talk to me about DeFi. What do you know about DeFi? And then I'll tell you why I think you should know about DeFi.
Well, I don't know much. I'm learning. Like, obviously, there's like, I'm not a business person at all. My entire focus in my life was always art. Art first. Art will bring me everything, and it's the only weapon I control. So I just try to wield it everywhere. But one of the things that is, well, here's I guess a big one. I was born in Poland back in 84, and so I don't necessarily remember the Iron Curtain, but I vividly remember like what hyperinflation did to my country on the transition. And so when I read news about governments printing trillions of dollars, that just scares the shit out of me. Like, it's just like, whoa, that should not be happening. So that naturally makes me think about crypto because of how the crypto works, and specifically Bitcoin, that has its own sort of scarcity built in. And as the more you learn about it, there's just so many intricacies about it. But on true proxy of Bitcoin and NFTs, DeFi comes in, and I just see like the way it applies to everything, where it allows you to transact between individuals in the space without restrictions, or with a fractional restriction compared to when you have to. One of the things that frustrated me when I came here to US from Europe was checks. Like, why do we write checks? Like, we're like, what are we, like in 1800s? Like, what's going on? Like, that makes no sense to me. It's such like an old school system. Or like if you want to send money to someone and you want to transfer money, it takes forever to do it. So, and then obviously PayPal made it like way easier. That's like one of the frontiers. So DeFi seems to me that it just on the level of that, it just makes everything more or less without frictions. And I can see utility of that for artists when they want to set up their own storefronts or mint their own NFTs, and they don't want to go through like big payment processors that take percentage of the money that they make just because they need to process the money, that kind of stuff. I think there's a lot of utility in that specifically, and that's what encourages me to learn about it. And I obviously know it's also a future, like what Visa just recently created, was the layer 2 of Ethereum. Was it Ethereum that Visa was allowed to have transactions with?
It was USDC. So USDC is the Gemini version of stablecoin. But yeah, they can.
And MasterCard did something similar. So you see like institutions moving, and it's here to stay. So it's definitely going to go and develop. So it'd be foolish not to learn, okay, there's this new space of digital transactions in business that affects my bottom line as an artist because I make money. Like if contracts that you deal with lawyers can be replaced with smart contracts that just inherently just make you don't have to worry like, oh, I'm going to get paid in 5 days or 30 days. Like, you don't worry about that at all. It's just like the moment the money comes in from the sale, you get it. Like, you're not waiting for anything. Like, that alone is a big deal. It's a huge deal. So, obviously I'm learning in this. I'm just a complete novice in this space, and I'm kind of trying to learn myself, my way around the ropes basically. But I find it really fascinating.
Well, that's already a pretty good head start. I mean, one of Mark Cuban's big things about NFTs is royalties, and he believes that, I mean, it's nice to have kind of exclusive one-offs, but actually a high velocity asset where people are sharing it around, but the artist in perpetuity gets a 1%, 2%, 3% royalty, so that no matter how long this thing exists, there's always a kickback to you in some form. How do you feel about that?
It's, I cannot complain about it, obviously. And I remember, I can't remember who was talking about it. It was one of the podcasts. I think it was someone on Lex Friedman's podcast talking about the whole idea of the royalties, or maybe it was someone else. I can't remember exactly, but that did not get coded in like on a whim. That it was something that the community was fighting for, apparently, which is great because like now it's kind of like it's almost like a paradigm shift. It brings back the ownership to the artist where it belongs. Like, how many stories we've heard about artists getting ripped off for the work they do. It's we're putting all the blood, sweat, and tears into one area that is not business. And it just makes artists very vulnerable to the market and making money. There's a reason why there's a myth of a starving artist, even though it's a myth. Like, you can make money being an artist. Like, I know artists that are millionaires.
well, yes, and it's a game, and it's definitely a play. But I think there is definitely, and Tom, you'll understand this as well. Like, when you're trying to make films are expensive, and you have to apply for funding, and people are very, very good at saying no to you. One of the things that I've discovered from DeFi that is absolutely incredible is that there is a way to think about funding in a very different way, and I'm going to just put an idea in your brains because it's been obsessing me. You can take DAI, which is a stable coin, and invest it in something called yen, and it will generate yield over time. These are managed strategies, but it generates yield. And so that yield is actually very knowable and predictable. You can now take a lump of money, let's say it's $2 million, and you want to make a film for $1 million. You put that $2 million into something called Alchemix, of all things. Alchemix then gives you $1 million straight away. That's a loan. Now, we all think of loans as things where there's interest to pay. You can default on them. They're a bad thing. They're putting you into debt. This loan pays itself off because what it's doing is it's going into Yearn and it's earning yield. And over the course of the maturity of that loan, it pays itself back. Your only debt is time. And when you hear something like that, you just go, this is too good to be true. It can't possibly happen. But if you try and accept that maybe this could happen, you go, okay, well, I'm a funding body. I have a pot of money. I invest into this thing and I extract 50% of that value, which can then be used however you want by anybody you want. And at the end of 12 months, it's refilled and I can do it again. So that $2 million over the course of 10 years can just continue funding you in perpetuity. And then you imagine thinking about selling an NFT that has this mechanism built into it so that the owner of that NFT receives 50% of the value of what they put in over the course of 12 months if they decide to hold it. You're like, well, how would that make people feel about their connection with you because there's something for them in it and they get their greed mechanics all tickled, and that's where DeFi starts to become really interesting. And it's yes, absolutely sending money freely around, but also the logic that we can apply to money and the way we can exploit the composability of DeFi. I've gone too far in the rabbit hole, but this is why I think
it's fascinating. I mean, and this is all on blockchain, right? So there's a full transparency where the money is. That's the big part of DeFi that I think is being overlooked as well. It's very difficult to remember, but just the fact that why can I make 7% or 8% on my Bitcoin and yet the bank only allows me to earn like 0.01%? That makes no sense. Is because you have full transparency. This is what the Bitcoin is going to make over time for you through those transactions, and therefore here's a number because you cannot hide it. It's all on blockchain. Yeah, and NFTs is actually really, really, really fucking cool.
I mean, there's another thing which you can stack them up and you can add multipliers so that if someone has your entire collection, there's a multiplier built into it that enables them to earn a living off the NFT collection. But then they could fractionalize that and issue shares on it. Let's say it's a Beeple and it had that embedded. Like the B20 guys could just issue a little yield-bearing thing. I mean, come on, this is wild. It's wild. Tom, do you have any exposure to DeFi in any way? I know we've got to stop soon, but I'm curious.
I do, but like Maciej said, I am fascinated by what you were just saying. I do not. So I've always told people I'm good at making money. I'm not good at investing money. So nobody should take investment advice from me. But yeah, I'm super interested in DeFi. I have some coins that are staked now, very little, just because I don't understand it well enough. But I literally made a mental note. I'm going to look up Alchemix, figure out what that's about. You know, that kind of stuff, when you get clever enough people thinking through, once you understand how something works, again, going back to that skills have utility obsession, once you understand how something works, now, as long as it doesn't violate the laws of physics, you can pull it off. And, you know, whether it's that right now we have an unbalanced risk reward, so there's huge potential upside in DeFi, whether it's, you know, a combination of transparency and risk, who knows, but this is a pretty magical moment. I think that if we can get sort of traditional banking out of the way and do it through code as law, with transparency, there are huge, huge, huge opportunities. So it'll be exciting to see where this goes. I have a running list now that I keep in my phone of things to research. And the second we're done, I'm, adding Alchemix to that list. So yeah, it's exciting.
Well, the thing is, it's not the only one. But I think one of the most amazing things about this space right now is that we're in that weird time where you can reach out and speak to the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Jeff Bezoses of the future just on Telegram and say, listen, I really want to do this. Is it possible? They go, oh, I don't know. Why don't we try? And you go, we're in a yes culture. And I've spent the majority of my professional life in a no culture. And I'm having the best time. I can honestly tell you. And it's like conversations like these where we can just jam on like stuff where we don't have the answers, and we don't care that we don't have the answers because the process is the most exciting part of it. So
yeah, I told my wife the other day that I've never had more fun in business than I've had in the last few months. I mean, this is so exciting.
I understand. Well, listen, gents, thank you so much for taking the time. I wish we could speak longer, but
Robin, a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
All right, brother.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.